Hello and welcome to the EXP Required podcast, where we talk about Final Fantasy and other things. I am Jack, and as always, joined by Mol. How you doing, Mol?
Not too bad. I know we always talk about the weather, but the weather has turned, the clocks have changed, I'm having a miserable time, and things are pretty bright today, because we are joined by our very first guest.
Hello, May. How would you like to give yourself an introduction? How you doing? You all right?
I'm very good. How are you?
Very well.
What's the weather like over in Ireland, where you're based? I have to know. We always talk about the weather at the beginning.
Oh, it is just a charming grey. It's just cloudy and overcast, which in Ireland is fantastic weather because it means it's dry, and that's all we get to hope for over here. Yeah, just a charming grey for a November afternoon.
As long as it's dry, you can't ask for anything better.
Absolutely, yeah. Literally, that's all.
Would you like to just give yourself a bit of an introduction about what you're about?
Yes, so my name is May. People would probably know me better as GameDove because I make videos under that name on YouTube. I'm a huge Final Fantasy fan, in particular Final Fantasy VIII, and I'm really big on, for example, costume design. I'm really big on women in video games. I'm really big on games with a story that you kind of have to dig out a bit yourself. And also really big Kingdom Hearts fan. So any other Kingdom Hearts fans out there, let me know. We're all in this waiting game together for Kingdom Hearts 4. Oh, I'm from Ireland as well. I think people have picked up on that. I am from Ireland.
No, not at all. No, fantastic.
So what I'm hearing there is that you have the best taste and the best critical taste as well, because nothing that I've just heard has been bad in any sense.
That sounds good. I mean, I've never really got into Kingdom Hearts, but I really, really want to. It's like Final Fantasy and Disney put together. Yeah. It just sounds like my ideal jam, but it feels so difficult to get into. It's like you need to have a degree in like games to understand how to start with it.
It's sort of like the video game One Piece, where there's just so much now that if you start at the beginning, you're going to be a while getting through it.
I think the biggest misconception with Kingdom Hearts is that everyone thinks the story is difficult to follow.
Yeah.
It can be. It's not. It's actually finding the consoles and being able to play the damn games is the hard bit.
Yeah,
True.
No, couldn't agree more. Like, you're hunting down like PSP, you're hunting down, you know, the DS games, you're hunting down 3DS. You know, you really are kind of
it's a nightmare.
About 6 consoles if you want to play it like the original intended way.
I do know the words are simple and clean, though, so I have been affected culturally by the...
That's all that matters, yeah.
Yeah, that's just been ingrained into my brain for the last 20 years. I won't sing it yet now. No one's had anything to drink. But yeah, okay, so we're just sort of like obviously going to start by chatting about your content. We talked a little bit offline before we started recording, but I found your stuff at 17 subscribers, which was quite recently. So you've had a bit of a rise in subscriber count really, really quickly. So well done.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So just you want to just talk a little bit about what your mission is, what your content is, your kind of general goals with the channel.
Yeah, so I think on my latest video about the Rinoa Ultimecia theory, somebody commented, I don't know why, but thank you for just all of a sudden popping up in 2024 and making Final Fantasy VIII videos. And my response was, yeah, I'm trapped in my own type of causal time loop where if I videos about Final Fantasy VIII in 2024, an evil version of myself from the future possesses my body. And I guess that's kind of my mission, where I'm just like, I have so much to say about Final Fantasy VIII that I don't see other people saying. I kind of want to put it out there what I think and see are there other people who agree, but also just talk about this game, which I think it's one of Final Fantasy's most interesting, but I also think it's a fascinating case study as a game itself, because it really is kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy in and of itself, in a game about a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, it's a game that the older it gets, it becomes more interesting, not even just the game itself, but the story around how the game was made, how it was perceived, and then how it's been treated. I mean, when the 20th anniversary of Final Fantasy VIII came around in 2019, they did remaster the game, but it was a remaster that was quite criticized for, I don't know how difficult it is to remaster games or make games, so this isn't like a criticism of skill or the people who made the game or anything, but it was often criticized for being kind of a rushed job, because there were, there's that famous scene where in the beginning when you're getting your first mission in Balam, that you come out of that cutscene and then Sid is just this completely pixelated, faded background character that you can't interact with because they forgot to update the character model. things like that. And when they remastered that game, Final Fantasy VIII was the oldest mainline Final Fantasy game to have never received an update or a remaster. That was the first time anything in the Final Fantasy VIII catalog had been touched since the game was released. So it seems like it just has this weird legacy within its own company, and also has its weird legacy in the series because it's a game about time that is so deeply affected by time. If Final Fantasy VIII had come out today, we would be getting supplementary material to expand all of the holes in the story. But because that wasn't what they were doing at the time, and they never came back to it to kind of update it, it is sort of a game that has, in and of itself, been lost to time. The original files were lost years ago. And also it's a game lost to time because it was just at a moment in time where we weren't getting sequels or follow-ons or books or prequel games or anything. That wasn't what was done. It was, okay, there were mistakes in this game, we'll improve them in the next game. And I think that you can see a lot of, well, for me, I love Final Fantasy X as well, and I think I can see a lot of the things that maybe they had wanted to do better in 8 done better in 10. I think in a notable way in things like the relationship between Jecht and Titus, or Titus, I don't know the correct way.
Oh no, here we go. Well, this is something that always comes up for us as well. Just go with whichever you feel is the best.
Yeah.
Titus.
Titus, yeah. But, they didn't want to make, originally Laguna was supposed to be a more grey figure. And I think the relationship with Squall, I remember reading, was supposed to be kind of the relationship that we ended up seeing with Titus and Jecht. Like it's a complicated relationship. Jecht isn't a wonderful guy. I would go as far as to saying he isn't a good guy at all. I don't know why everybody's being like, oh, he gets a redemption arc. Does he? Question that, but that's my personal opinion. But I think you can see that a lot of the things that 8 wanted to do maybe didn't do right and got a do-over in 10, whereas I think 8 would have benefited from an updated sequel. And I think that's why I'm so interested in it, because I feel like the game didn't get its fair shot like its kind of successors have gotten since.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I think at some point I'd love to go and dig into the history of the game. I mean, I've done a little bit of research recently into Final Fantasy IX, and that game was kind of unique because it looks back at the series' early history, but it's received very differently in 3 different territories. It's received differently in Japan. It was sold more in Japan than it did in North America, and loads more than in Europe. And that's a lot to do with the fact that 9 was a throwback to the earlier titles, and actually the sales kind of showed that. But when 8 came out, and I remember when it came out, the magazines talked about how it was the best one ever, it was better than 7, and generally the games press critical opinion of it was, I wouldn't say it was universal, because people did have problems with the fact that it wasn't the same as the materia system and stuff like that, but it seems to have been reinvented over time, that it's kind of been seen as the one that no one likes as much. I think I'd attribute a lot of that to content creators in the mid-2000s sort of shitting all over it. So I think what I want to try and do, and I think you're the same here, but I don't want to speak for you, is to try and go, hang on a minute, that's not true. We've reinvented the past here, because it was always as well received, I think, anyway.
Definitely, because I think, like I mentioned it in my recent video, where like a lot of the things that we think now about Final Fantasy VIII, and I suppose a lot of the Final Fantasy games of the time, were created in those forum boards, those specific like fan websites that were kind of everywhere in the late 90s and early 90s. And they've shaped a huge amount, both in the West and also in Japan. They shaped a huge amount of how the games were perceived. And I think that especially had a huge impact. You know, if you go back and look at some of the things that are still available, like 8 was so divisive. People did not rock with the fact that, first of all, that there was a romance plot that was so pivotal to the story. And they also didn't rock with Squall at all. They didn't like Rinoa. They didn't like the ending, which is where a lot of the Rinoa's Ultimecia thing came from, trying to make it make sense. And so I think that shaped a huge amount of the perception of the game and made people go, oh, okay, hang on, actually everybody hates this game. Maybe it's terrible.
So I think this is actually a really good point for me to break in, because I was watching your video on, I can't remember which one specifically it was, sorry, but I know you did mention at one point that it's, you know, the whole idea of love versus duty is kind of like the core theme of Final Fantasy VIII, which I completely agree with. Actually, it's not something that I'd ever really given consideration to before, but once it's brought up and I'm like, Oh shit, actually, yeah, that's completely right. But you do mention a couple of times in your videos that the Squall and Rinoa love story is actually quite compelling, I suppose. Yeah. And that's really, really intriguing to me, because most people that I've ever spoken to about Final Fantasy VIII have really, really hated the love story. And I've always felt like the only person that felt that it was a natural progression, that it was a good development of both of their characters, and that it felt like a decent story for it to happen in. So, number one, thank you for sharing that opinion. It's nice to finally meet someone who actually I can converse with on that.
I'm totally in the same boat as you, where you look everywhere you look, and anybody you talk to, even in real life, is like, oh god, yeah, and the romance plot was terrible. And I'm like, no, I thought it wasn't really. As you know, I had heard everybody hating on it before I had played the game, because I had come in from being a Kingdom Hearts fan, and I kind of wanted to play Final Fantasy to see, you know, because of the overlap. I played it and I was like, what were you guys giving out about? Honest to God. No, what was the buzz about? First of all, I'm a number one Rinoa defender. I just love that character, and I'm gunning to make a video about this another time, but like, Rinoa gets so much flack in the game and out of the game that doesn't make any sense if you look at her actions and don't assume malice, because there's literally no reason to assume malice. And also, the characters in the game also have to go, oh yeah, sorry, we were wrong about that. Like, at every point they're like, yeah, we were wrong about Rinoa. And people are still like, yeah, and Rinoa's like a ditzy flirt and she's a damsel in distress. For the love of God.
It could not be more incorrect. No, I agree.
I agree with that as well. She's the outsider character as well, which is interesting, because of course you've got Zidane to an extent in 9, certainly Cloud in 7, and definitely Tidus in 10. They're the outsiders, and the story's told through their perspective, whereas Rinoa is the kind of, she's not part of the military.
Yeah,
you don't. And
she's
her.
So it's almost like the story should come from her perspective.
I don't know about you guys, but one of the things that I always hear about Final Fantasy as well is that it's, you know, young teenage heroes saving the world and beating God, and, you know, that's just how JRPGs are. And to an extent, yeah, I guess a lot of the characters across the franchise are actually, they're relatively young. They're now younger than I am by about 10 years or so, which just gives me the heebies every time I remember that.
Younger than you, I hate it. It's so
it's awful, isn't it? It's fucking awful. But I think in 8 particularly, that fact is really easily overlooked because of the way that the models are. I think having it sandwiched between 7 and 9, where the models are very, very chibified, they're very visually striking and very non-realistic, versus 8. Like, I remember when 8 first came out, playing it on the Christmas of 99 and being like, holy shit, these look like real people. They've got proper proportions. It's not like, you know, I can't see the elbows properly of 7, and it's not like the really cutesy models of 9 either. So for me personally, it's really easy to forget that these characters on screen are still children, because they're not being represented in that same small cutesy style. You know, obviously I'm not going to speak for everyone that actually plays these games, but I would be really interested to know how much of that criticism specifically of, you know, Rinoa's too young and too naive and stuff is attributed to the way that she's modelled and looks in game, actually.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, and this is something actually I see coming up a lot. Again, it's on my list of like things to make videos about, but the translation, the English translation specifically, does not help. In the original Japanese, she has a unique speech pattern that is meant to have her portrayed as like quirky and cute, but that's really difficult to translate to English, and it makes her sound sometimes like the things she says, they come off as being quite babyish when that wasn't the original intention, which is why I think there's a little bit of a disparity between Japan and the West, or certainly in English-speaking countries.
And that's not just speaking for Rinoa either. I mean, Jack will be the first person to know that when it comes to translations, I'm all over it. I love this kind of stuff. But I know that, you know, Squall being represented as a loner as well, and, you know, his iconic whatever, doesn't actually fucking say that in the Japanese. It's a different line every single time, and I don't know whether it was just the case of the translation was being lazy, or if they just decided it was easier to have his character behave in a certain way. But yeah, Rinoa's definitely not the only person that suffers from that.
Your Amini is the line that comes to mind.
That's exactly what I was thinking of as well. Yeah, you know, it's sort of like it kind of throws you, because you're like, what? You're 17, like what?
Yeah, who just throws that out at 17?
Bitch, like, what are you talking about?
Absolutely, no, that's interesting. Have you played Final Fantasy VIII demo, May, at all?
Yes, I have.
Just for interest.
Yes, yeah.
Which one have you played? Have you played the European one? Or have you played the
European one? Yeah.
Right, because it's interesting, because I went through and tracked them all down. There's an American one which is slightly different, where you can play as Rinoa.
I heard about that
in Dollet. Now, what's interesting about that, coincidentally, is that Rinoa literally just says ... when you speak to her, because they never had any dialogue for her in that part of the game, which is quite interesting. But with Squall, on the thread that Mol's just talked about there, the localization or the translation they created for that part of the game was, I think, done by a different team. It certainly was its own project. And actually, Squall comes across a lot more anxious than he does overtly, I guess, deadpan. With the like inside his head stuff, he just sort of comes across like he's scared, as opposed to being ambivalent, or whatever the word would be. That's probably the wrong word. I think it's quite interesting that actually, like, these translations had a massive impact on how you perceive these characters, and it would be really interesting to speak to the Japanese audience of these games, especially Final Fantasy VIII, to see what their perspective on it would be, because it's probably completely different.
No,
so.
It almost makes you want for a retranslation, actually, just to see how they do it differently this time.
Yes, absolutely. Because I think even if you look at the scenes of Squall as a little boy, he's very clearly like a deeply anxious little boy who's very kind of anxiously attached to his older sister, and is kind of trying to convince himself that everything will be fine. Like, there's so many points in the game where Squall is very clearly in the middle of a serious anxiety attack, very seriously having like a moment of severe panic. He's kind of all the time assuming the worst, so I think it makes so much more sense that he was originally meant to be a lot more internally anxious than sort of ambivalent. Like, for me, it makes a lot more sense. And like you were saying, I'd love to see a retranslation with more of that in mind, if that was the original intention.
Following on from that, then, obviously you've been creating videos for not too long now, but they've all been fantastic analytical essays.
Thank you so much.
Genuinely, every single point that you've made in them has been like, I want to hear so much more of this. And you mentioning that, there's parallels with 10, and they've maybe improved on the things. If you ever want to make 10 videos as well, if you want to change my mind on 10, I think you're going to be the person to do it.
Thank you very much.
But leading on from that, then, what other kind of channels and creators are out there that kind of, inspired you to do what you're doing? Because you've popped up out of nowhere and kind of taken English-speaking Final Fantasy YouTube a little bit by storm. Like Jack was saying, you've exploded in popularity, and I would love to know what kind of inspirations you have.
Oh gosh, well, the videos that I make, I try and keep them between maybe like 8 and 15 minutes. My favorite YouTube videos to watch are the ones that are like 3 or 4 hour long. So kind of that was what I was trying to make originally, because the very first ever video I made was like a year ago, and it was 85 minutes long. It was just, honestly, it was this verbal dump of all the thoughts I had about Final Fantasy VIII in this one go. And then I kind of hated it. I thought, no, and it was so horrible a process to do. Like, I was editing it in CapCut. It was horrible. And that software is not built for any video that's over like 15 minutes. It's just not. And then I came across this video by a channel. I don't know how to pronounce the word. I would have pronounced it Gnosis, Gno.
Oh, Gnosis. Yeah, I know the one you mean. Yeah. Gnosis.
And I started looking through his videos, and a lot of them were really good videos with a lot of interesting information, but they were like 8 or 9 minutes long. And I went, God, I could do that. I could break down all these thoughts I had into 8 or 9 minute videos. I'll give that a try. And so that was when I was like, oh, maybe I'll try and put all this important information into these kind of shorter videos instead of trying to constantly make really long form ones all the time, because I found that very, very difficult. It turned out it was exactly the way to go. There's another Irish person making Final Fantasy content. I think they're more focused on like Final Fantasy VII, but they were the first ever channel to like give me a shout out, because I love their video that they have on Final Fantasy VIII. It's a 2-minute long video, and it is the most interesting video on Final Fantasy VIII that I have seen in a long time. It's about the relevance about the moon in Final Fantasy VIII, which I had never thought of. All of these years thinking about Final Fantasy VIII, talking about it, and I had never considered this aspect of it. So shout out to Orion85, another Irish person. He has like, I think 3,000 followers. And when I made my first video, he was like, you guys should go watch this. And he messaged me and was like, very much like you guys with your lovely messages, which were so much appreciated. He was like, yeah, you should keep doing this. This is very good. And I was like, oh God, people like this. So yeah, shout out to them. Always great to hear Irish accents in Final Fantasy content. And then obviously you guys were so nice, and I was like, oh my God, people think I'm interesting enough that they're like saying, you guys, your videos were good. And I was like, oh my God, And so that was kind of where I started to go, oh, I could keep doing this, And in particular, I would get comments as well being like, oh my God, it's so nice to, and with great respect, Jack, but the comments were always like, it's so nice to hear somebody who's not a man talking about it.
Yeah, no, totally, no. Yeah.
You know, I was kind of like, oh, thanks, guys. Like, wow. Like, I suppose that was kind of what made me go, oh, yeah, I can keep doing this. Like, there's an audience for this.
There is space, yeah.
Yeah, that kind of gave me the push I needed to think, oh, maybe the videos aren't, because every video I make, I think it's the worst I've ever made, and I leave and I can't rewatch them. And so when people go, no, this is really interesting, I liked it, then I'm like, oh, are you sure?
That's the artistic curse, I think that is.
Always your own worst critic, yeah.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. And then as well, for when I was making the costume video, I follow this YouTube channel, Modern Girls, and years and years ago when they were just starting out, they're more kind of like a pop culture kind of YouTube channel now, but when they started out, they were really a fashion YouTube channel, and they used to review like the best certain color costumes in film and TV, and they would go through like Hollywood, they would go through Bollywood films, Eastern European films, and they would rate they would just make these compilation videos of all the best costumes, TV and film, in like certain colors. That was where I started to notice, like, as well, all of these themes crop up with these certain colors, and that kind of got me into reading into color theory in fashion, and particularly in TV and film and media in general. And so that was kind of a lot of the inspiration behind that video in particular, yeah.
Which was a wonderful video as well. Like, I don't think people actually give costume design enough thought, and it is one of those things that is just so important in telling a visual story in any sense whatsoever. So to actually see someone talk about that was like, yes, oh my god, she knows what she's talking about.
Yeah, I think there's you reference a book in that video as well. I think it's the first video you did. It's the Sorcerer's Ultimecia one.
Yes.
You reference, I don't know the name of the book.
Yes,
I'm sorry,
the
Witches.
Devil in the Shape of a Woman. It's about how the Puritan communities colonized North America, how they created the idea of the witch as kind of the woman deserving of punishment, and how that narrative was created. And it's actually a really interesting book. She kind of brings up the idea of that, like, a lot of the witches were women who wouldn't pay something to the church, or they were divorced, or they were local healers practicing like different customs or something. They were not sort of, I don't want to say conforming, but because they were often conforming in particular to Puritan ideas of like racial superiority. Like, they often had no problem conforming to that, but they were not behaving the way that the Puritans had directed that their women should behave. And so they needed to create this idea of a terror and this borderline abusive character that seduced men against their will, and you know, often were depicted as seducing women as well into this life of witchcraft with their debauchedness. You know, certainly when I played, I had already read the book before I was probably on like my second or third playthrough of Final Fantasy VIII, and I started to kind of go, oh, there's a lot of parallels in between that concept of witch, which isn't exclusive to North America. You know, it's kind of similar in a lot of places in Europe as well, and how the sorceresses are depicted as these, the hypersexuality is used to depict their villainy, you know, compared to sort of the, you know, we'll say like in the party. And I totally understand that the main characters that we play as, they're supposed to be teenagers, so there's a difference there as well. But yeah, there's definitely an intentionality in depicting the big baddie, the main controller of everything, and really the first female villain, because there was an argument about the Final Fantasy III big villain, the
Cloud of Darkness. Yeah.
I fully subscribe to that argument that she is the first female villain of Final Fantasy, because the Cloud of Darkness is the sort of genderless form that takes on whatever shape it pleases. So I don't think that.
No, I agree with you.
Yeah,
See, I think from your Sorceress and Costume video, there was a point where you did mention in it that Ultimecia in particular is very hypersexualized, and I had a moment of going, actually, no, hang on, she's not hypersexualized. And then I had to take a step back and go, the design is hypersexualized, because the character isn't, does not equal. So that was a really, really good point to bring up, actually. And again, it's one of those things of, if you don't bring it up and challenge it overtly, then it's the kind of thing that really will pass over a lot of people's heads. I mean, you know, I've been playing this game since it came out, and that concept has never occurred to me once.
Yeah.
Something else that I also thought of especially when you brought up that book as well, is and this goes back to translation as well, is that the original Japanese word for sorceress is just witch, which makes it so much more overt, I guess, in that sense. And, you know, I don't necessarily want to say that the people who are developing this game were really narrowing in on the idea of, you know, the puritanical witch, because whether they did or not doesn't mean anything. But that, and then, you know, Sifa's cross on his clothes as well, it all kind of really started melding together in a way that, if, you know, for 20 plus years I've never considered. So, you know, there are new things to be discussed all the time within these games, and that's fun and important, I think.
Absolutely. And the funny thing about Cypher's cross is that I only recognized the type of cross it was because my mother did that Camino walk years ago, and she brought back a little souvenir with it, and it's like propped up in her sitting room, and it's like on the mantelpiece and everything. And I remember looking at it one day and being like, that's really familiar. Where do I know that from? And I was playing Final Fantasy VIII, and then I was like, no, actually I was looking up files for Final Fantasy VIII when I was making the first video I ever made last year, and I went, oh god, that's the same. So I was checking then on the wiki, and I was like, yeah, no, that is actually the Santiago cross. And I was like, wow, that's actually nuts that he has like the cross of the patron saint of Spain, who, by the way, when I was researching who that guy was and the history of the St. James cross, that's a nuts dude. Like that's a guy who's straight up nuts, you know, because I was reading up who he was, and they had all the Bible verses of him, and it's just him going, Jesus, please let me burn down this town for you. Please, I swear to God, make it so good for you. And Jesus is like, please, somebody get him out of here. He's actually insane. Like, why does he keep having to burn civilians for me? This is nuts. We can't be doing this. We're supposed to be good guys.
Sounds like a Final Fantasy villain, doesn't he?
It does, yeah.
He sounds like one of those like creepy advisors in like a Disney film where he's like, please let me kill all the children for you. And Jesus is like, oh my god, no, stop. What the hell? It's so embarrassing. And then he's like the first to be martyred for the cause, which I remember reading that and going like, yeah, no, that so makes sense.
I love the graphics that you included in that, by the way. I had to pause just to laugh for a little bit.
Thank you. Yeah, because I feel like I when I make videos, I talk with like what I call my debate voice, because I used to do debating, and sometimes my accent can obscure certain words, so I have to kind of like, and we're talking very slowly about this particular thing, which I don't think leaves room to be funny, which I love when I see it in video, so I always try and put them in mind. Like I love reading, you know, somebody makes a video and they have like funny captions, and I love that, so I always try and put them in mind.
I noticed that you obviously talking about the thing we talked about before, but the hypersexualization, I think was the phrase we used, and I think there's the moment in the Ultimecia video where you zoom in on and you make do you notice anything? And how you do that with humor, I really think that's refreshing as well, because you're talking about quite a serious topic, and I guess, I don't know if misogynistic is the right word, but quite a sexist topic in some ways, or could have been written sexist, but you're actually dancing all over it, as opposed to you know, which I think is a really positive way of dealing with that kind of stuff.
I think, well, also I think when you look at it, I do just find it very funny. I think it's so obvious that like it was made by a group of men in their 30s, and I'm like, I can imagine that's exactly what the fuck you would put in it. You know, I find it funny. I go, oh, you know, I mean, I do, like at a certain point you do just kind of have to laugh at stuff like that, because it once you notice it does become so obvious. And you know, I don't necessarily think it's done, you know, because I said it to somebody once and they got quite like, oh, you know, people, they wouldn't put that in on purpose. It's like, I don't necessarily think it is entirely on purpose. I just don't think people realize why they associate things with certain things. Like, I don't believe that they sat around huddled in a meeting room together and said, how are we going to make this female villain look horrible and make everyone hate her? Oh, we'll make her, you know, we'll give her a plunging neckline. I don't think that was the case. I think they inherently associated one with the other without really noticing.
100% agree.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, regular listeners will know that this is my time to get on my high horse now. But I mean, there's no escaping your personal inherent biases, you know, when it comes to character design or behavioral traits or anything like that. I mean, I'm going to very briefly talk about Final Fantasy 16, but you have your first villainous character is a woman, and she's sexy leather wearing, and she's a very, very specific look. And again, I don't necessarily think that it was done on purpose to, you know, highlight femininity and villainy in the same breath, but it's definitely done and has a certain effect. And, you know, you can't escape those kind of things, especially from the late 90s as well, when, you know, I don't think that Japan has completely stagnated necessarily, but I'm sure that the world there was very, very different 30 odd years ago, because it is over here in the West.
Certainly, yeah.
And to know that Ultimecia is, again, you know, the first female villain in the franchise too, yeah, I wouldn't really have expected it any other way, looking back in retrospect. So all fantastic points that you brought up.
Yeah, no, I completely agree as well. I suppose again, not to hammer home the point, but I am from Ireland, and that kind of, I wouldn't say sped up in terms of its views on certain things, but certainly in the last really only 10-15 years have certain things been heavily destigmatized here. So I can totally understand. It would have been extremely similar in Ireland 30 years ago. That would have been exactly the same. Sexy leather wearing woman burn the witch. That would have been certainly the most horrific thing, the most villainous thing that would have been considered. So like you said, I wouldn't have expected it any other way for 1997. It was only legal to get a divorce in Ireland in 1996.
Really?
Yes.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yes, there was a huge referendum about it in Ireland, and it passed by a really, really tiny margin, like 1%. It was a hugely controversial referendum over here, and it only, officially came through in 96. So I understand, I know people are always like, oh, Japan socially is a more conservative culture, but I think because I'm from a similar kind of that was very conservative up to very recently, I can see why they may have, certainly because I don't know anybody who made the game and I don't want to presume anything, but I can certainly see where that influence would have come, and it's very obvious when you are a woman in a culture like that, where he comes from, and you literally just have to go, oh yeah, okay.
Brilliantly said. I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
I know I mentioned to you offline earlier, but for other listeners, half of my family is Irish as well, so I never grew up in the country, but I definitely have family who think and behave certain ways, let's put it that way. So yeah, you saying that as being just a thing to get on with, really, and you don't challenge the status quo, or at least that was never my experience with my Irish side of my family, at the very least. Nothing's ever challenged, it's just this is how the world is and you get on with it. So yeah, no, again, brilliantly said.
Thank you very much.
No, it's a very interesting point for me, because obviously, I'm not a woman. I do have the Irish heritage as well, so I can sort of relate to that a little bit. Probably similar to what Mol said there. Not having lived in the country, I've heard of those kind of things you discussed, sort of as a third party, I guess you could say. But it is interesting to look into comparisons between different cultures, especially, and we've used the phrase "the West," which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing, because it's very good sometimes for arguments. Exactly, that's a good way of putting it. There are different flavors of the West, I think, and it is good diving into some of this stuff to consider different regions and how they're impacted differently, how they develop, and how art and culture changes them over time. And it's really good to see the parallels, or the lack of parallels. And I think as well, my point on the whole, what you said there about using, I guess, I don't know if classic's the right word, but imagery that is associated with evil, the sort of talking about Benedicta, I think, in Final Fantasy 16, the kind of sorcerousy, witchy looking, stereotypical leather-clad kind of lady. I think some of it might be down to, and again, I don't want to comment on what the people that have made the game have done, but a lot of it might be because of that kind of parroting. People associate this, so it's like, well, actually, I'm going to make the villain look like this. I'm going to have the kind of moustache twirling, Mohar, Dick Dastardly looking character be the evil person. It's sort of refreshing sometimes to see when people go against that trend and change it up a little bit. Which, I mean, Final Fantasy does, but sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, definitely. I think Final Fantasy has a very tried and true formula for its villains. And sometimes it breaks out of them, and often it does, an exceptional job even within that kind of framework that it uses. But it definitely has, I think, a tried and true formula that its fan base loves, its fan base are so used to. And I think, it often sticks to what it knows in that regard.
Something that I've always thought of for the franchise is that it's very young adult coded. And I stand by that even for Final Fantasy XVI, which is the series' first mature rated game. I do not think that a bit of side boob and a little bit of swearing necessarily makes a mature game. I still think that it is very much coded as a young adult series. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. Though every entry is different, has its own, cast, has its own world, has its own themes, even if the themes don't necessarily diverge all that much from love and friendship is good and defeat the evil empire, they do follow a formula, and that formula is very much a young adult formula as well.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. Yeah, and it's funny because I remember, so I haven't played Final Fantasy 16, but I was looking up clips of it online, and people were saying oh, this is the scene of Clive and Jill around the fire pit and everything, and I was kind of going, that's why it's an M-rated.
Yeah.
What are you talking?
It's ridiculous, isn't it? It's not that big of a deal.
I think a lot of it, and this is going to be, is that the word fuck is said about 10 times a minute. Like, it's Ben Starr's favourite word, clearly. And I think a lot of this has to do with culture, and especially, I guess, American audiences on language. Like, you can put as much violence in as you want as long as you don't swear. You know, there's a lot of that culture going on. I think because that is the real difference when you play 16. There's a time. Well, there isn't. We just said there, and the nudity in Final Fantasy VIII is probably quote unquote worse than it is in Final Fantasy 16, and the sexual scenes that are in 16, like you say, there's a bit of side boob. It's not, there's nothing really overtly pornographic about it, shall we say. There's just lots of swear words, and it's like, really, you know, that's what everyone's saying at that age anyway. It's like, you know,
God, right.
Just it actually feels more. When I played the game and heard a lot of the swearing going on, I didn't think, wow, this is more mature. I just thought this is more natural than trying to dart around using that language, you know. So, and I know that obviously, without going down a massive rabbit hole, I know that Japan has a different language style, and the swearing is a different thing in Japan and stuff like that. So I guess that might have something to do with it. It's definitely a rabbit hole to go down at some point.
Yeah. And I just think, like, I saw a clip of like people recording every time Ben Starr says fuck in that game, and I just have to think of like all the other games where it would have been so much more beneficial if they just let those guys let out a fuck every now and then. Like, Noctis had a couple of fucks in him. Like, he really could have used...
Oh God, no, if anyone had a fuck in it was Noctis.
They could have given that guy a release valve. They could have given him one fuck, you know? Like, they could have let him have that one.
God, sorry, I just had a mental image of Noctis waking up after the destruction of Ultimecia, just lying in bed and being like, well, shit. Like, that would have worked there, I think.
Is it Selfie would have been the one that was the F-bomb queen in Final Fantasy VIII? I remember when I was a kid, of course, I mean, ironically, we're sort of talking about, you know, the swearing and how, like, obviously we're older and we've you know, got this more language. But I remember, actually, funny enough, even though it had the language toned down compared to, say, Final Fantasy 16, Final Fantasy, like, was one, I think it might have been the first game I saw swearing in, especially when it's written down. And even, I mean, it's not really swearing, but when Selfie flips off the guards at the missile base and says, up yours, like, I remember that being the coolest thing in the world. Like, oh my God, up yours. Like, it's so cool. So.
There's a scene where Rinoa, it's after Rinoa has been possessed and she's still unconscious in the med bay, and they go on the White Sea ship, and the Timber Elves are there, and they just start laying into Squall because, you know, they're like, we let you go with her and you promised nothing would happen to her, and now she's unconscious. And I think one of them goes, you son of a bitch. And I remember going,
that's really strong for it.
Go after it. It was like you were saying, it was so kind of like at the time even being like, oh my, they said bitch in a video game, what the hell?
Yeah, totally. There's a few. I think Laguna says shit when he goes off the cliff.
I mean, you can't blame a man for falling.
Oh shit! I think it doesn't quite say, like, it's SHI and then it sort of like fades out. But I remember thinking, wow, oh my God, like when he does that stupid jump off the cliff and all self-inflicted, silly man. Oh, whoop! Brilliant scene.
That's a scene I want to see remade. Actually,
just to watch the man suffer.
Yeah.
Oh, poor Laguna. We love Laguna. Okay, brilliant. One thing I'll add on that as well on your content as well is that, like, I have noticed, and I don't know if you have, because I don't know how many Final Fantasy communities you're part of, but I've seen that your video, I think it's definitely the one that's got Squall in the thumbnail, shared in 2 different places.
No way.
Yeah, no, so I was on the Final Fantasy VIII community on Facebook, which is pretty much the only reason I'm on Facebook, by the way, that someone actually shared the video, said, what does everyone think about these points, which I think is really interesting, because clearly people are vibing with the things you're talking about.
And open for discussion too, which
which I think is really good.
So rare these days.
Yeah, definitely, which is great. You know, it's refreshing. So we're celebrating what you do, and I think it's given me a bit of a kick up the arse as well, because of course our content has been, we've been doing this. How long have we been doing this now, Mol? 6-7 months,
something like that.
I guess we found our traction quite quickly with the podcast stuff, but it's only really been recently we've been doing the video list feature stuff. I've been kind of practicing at that on my own channel for a while, but so I'm not completely new to it. But actually we've both started thinking about, let's write video essays, you know, kind of, and that's my term is to be a bit inspired by the way you've done it, because I think it's clearly resonating with people. Hopefully we'll be as successful.
Absolutely, best of luck. I have absolutely full belief that you will be.
Thank you.
Cool, brilliant, thank you. So that actually nicely leads me on to the final question of this section, which is, do you have a dream project or video you'd like to make, or collaboration you'd want to do? And don't worry, we won't be offended if you don't think it's us.
Yeah, what do you mean? My dream collaboration is happening right now.
Oh,
Yes,
that's nice.
that's what we like to hear.
Isn't that nice?
I'm really
Thank you.
buttering you up now. I think dream video, God, I have so many. They're on my list of things to do. I would love to, and it's the one I'm working on right now, but I kind of want to see how much justice I can do it. I'd love to talk about like a defense of Rinoa, because she is one of my favorite characters of all time. And I feel, I know we were talking about this a bit before, but I feel like she gets done a bit of a bad deal, both within the narrative, and that kind of informs outside of the narrative, like how people view her. And I remember playing the game for the first time, and I would kind of be like, why are they saying that to her? That doesn't make any sense. Like we have absolutely no evidence to suggest that. You could only assume maliciousness or stupidity there. Where did that come from? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like that, and even the characters, sometimes I'd be like, whoa, like what? Hang on, where did that come from? You have absolutely no reason to say that or behave like that. So I'd love to make a video kind of looking into that. That would be probably something that I'm really hoping that I get to do justice on, because like if I start talking about Rinoa, I won't stop, and I'll get really annoyed by it. Like I have an image, say, somewhere on one of my folders where I like superimposed like a hand holding a gun onto Rinoa and was like I'm fucking not kidding around anymore. Like, I'm getting so serious about defending Rinoa. You know, I was 15, 16 on like GameFAQs forum boards being like, no, she's not a slut, leave her alone. I have all of this pent up sort of rage that I want to harness for good purposes in defending her. I wouldn't say a grudge against Tetsuya Nomura. I would say I have violent urges, but I wouldn't say a grudge, because I don't know if anybody, I feel like I'm the only person who's noticed this. Like, I feel like I'm going insane when I point this out to people. But Rinoa is the only female character, the only main character that Nomura worked on who does not appear once in Kingdom Hearts. She's the only, certainly mainline ones that he worked on in those games, she is the only main character that never appears. And because I've gone down this rabbit hole, because I'm annoyed at him all the time, I've gone down that rabbit hole, and it's like, if you read and this is the translation of the Ultimecia, but the first ever Kingdom Hearts Ultimecia, they actually ask him like, hey, Squall's in this game, where's Rinoa? And he's like, oh yeah, Rinoa doesn't appear, huh? Weird, isn't it? And that's it.
Wow, funnily enough, I have violent tendencies now too.
Wow, you've blown my mind. I mean, I've not really got into Kingdom Hearts, but that's shocking, actually. Because
they got fucking Setzer in. Why couldn't they have Rinoa, for God's sake? Oh,
don't you be dissing Setzer now.
I have taken the thoughts out of my head and said them directly. Thank you. That was always my point. You found a place to put goddamn Setzer in the game. You could have found something to put Rinoa in. Like, there's no excuse, in my opinion. You can fit in Setzer. For the love of God, you could have put Rinoa in somewhere. You know, any other time, like they've discussed that, like, they were going to put Laguna in Birth by Sleep, and then he didn't really fit. That's fine. Sometimes that happens. They were going to put Irvine in the first Kingdom Hearts. They were going to put him in Destiny's Island. Then his cowboy aesthetic didn't really fit, so they replaced him with Waka. That's fine. I get that. But they don't have a reasonable explanation for why Rinoa's not in the game. They just go, not in it, isn't it? Yeah. I don't know.
I think that's really bizarre. I mean, again, this probably adds to the pot of, in general, about Final Fantasy VIII and how it's been differently perceived over time. Yeah. Because the thing is with Rinoa and Squall as a couple is that they were a massive part of the original marketing thing for the game. And of course, that initial... It kind of gets forgotten because of like graphics have moved on so much, but that initial CG opening, Rinoa is practically the star of it because of that. You know, the bit with that catching the feather, and of course the ballroom scene, which was the tech demo for the original PS2 launch event, which happened before E3 in 1999. I'm a total nerd on this stuff, by the way. And that was remade like 2 or 3 times to showcase the new hardware. And so it was Square's big thing, and it was around the time they were doing Spirits Within and stuff like that. So, and the thing is with Rinoa is like she hasn't got that complicated an outfit, so it's not hard. Like as if it's really hard to like design her in. I mean, again, I don't know about game design and art design in games, but like she's wearing a blue outfit. It's not like she's wearing something really intricate. What's wrong? Like,
yeah, it's because Nomura has such a strange relationship with Rinoa. Like because again, I'm a massive nerd for Final Fantasy VIII, and I have read what I think is everything, and then it turns out I know nothing. But he has gone on record saying that he found her difficult to kind of conceptualize. And when they were making Final Fantasy VIII, I think it was Kazushiki Nojima who said Nomura had actually created a Rinoa dictionary that she should, he would say she should do this, she should be like that. So he put a lot of work into her, and then goes and says, well, actually, I find it difficult to know what to do with her, essentially. I always wonder how much of that is because Rinoa, in the developers' own words themselves, this isn't me saying it, but Rinoa was supposed to be a female character who was kind of, her personality was first and then her attractiveness was second. Like, they wanted a character who was attractive because of her personality and not because she was pretty necessarily. And that's directly what they've said. And I often wonder if that's where his difficulty, quote unquote, in knowing what to do with her or how to put her somewhere is coming from, because he has to write a female character with a personality, and that's...
I can understand his comments to some degree. I mean, I do a lot of hobby writing, and there'll be times when, I can very easily get into the head of a character and I don't need to worry too much because, throw a situation at me, I'll be able to predict how they'll do it. Sometimes there'll be a character where I need to sit down and go, right, this is their core values, this is how they react to certain things, and I'm not sure off the top of my head how they would react in a certain situation, but, give me this outline and I'd be able to do it. So I can respect very much that they had to create a Rinoa dictionary, so to speak, but it would be really interesting to know what the process behind designing characters is like, whether, especially like even now in the modern age as well, like is it the design that comes first, or is it the story and the personalities that come first? Because I mean, well, I'm looking at Benedicta again and I can't help but feel like it was the design that came first, and I feel like that for Jill in that game as well. It is difficult to reconcile that same thought with Final Fantasy VIII because the characters' designs are they're not complicated. Like Jack said, Rinoa just happens to wear a blue jacket and a pair of shorts. Selphie wears a short dress and she's a Genki girl. Zell's a bruiser and he likes to run around. He wears big baggy pants and, what's essentially a tank top under a jacket. This is all very fine and well, and it all makes sense for these characters. But if you take a step back and have a look at them, you also go, well, hang on, why are they dressed the way that they do? Selphie is dressed that way because she is the Genki girl. She has that energy and she's the young cutesy thing. Of course you'll put her in a short dress. Quistis is the older sister style of character. She's an instructor. Of course she's really quite conservatively dressed. She's got no skin showing whatsoever. She wears glasses. It's all very much leads into a specific stereotype, I suppose. So it would be really interesting to know how they actually put those characters together, and I can see it being personality first, honestly, because the personalities are very strong in Final Fantasy VIII. I don't think that their designs go against their personalities, but if I had to redesign them, I'm not sure if I would necessarily go for... Again, it's the whole inherent biases and how you perceive things initially. I would probably do very similar things. I maybe wouldn't choose the same colours, though. I certainly wouldn't choose a colour that no one can agree on. Quistis, I'm looking at you, Quistis. I feel like I'm the only person in the world who thinks that Quistis is wearing orange. Everyone else seems to think
she's wearing orange. Is she not wearing orange?
She's wearing orange.
May and Jack, will you marry me on this day? Finally, there are people out there that agree with me.
Wearing orange. I would have always sworn she was wearing orange.
I've gotten into so many arguments about this.
Is this like that? Is this like that white dress and blue dress
thing? Oh my god! I think it might be. Good lord!
Someone's winding you up. There's no way that she's wearing orange. It's obvious she's wearing orange.
People that do not know each other across decades, Jack. I shit you not. People think she wears pink.
What? Mind you, I mean that's weird. I mean, I think that's got me. It's like it's orange. I mean, to be fair, I think that of all the characters, the one that probably could have stayed in the Seed uniform the most would have been Quistis, and it would have been fine. That's I'll tell you what, that is the coolest uniform in the world. That Seed uniform, I want that uniform.
I remember going into secondary school and being like, "Damn, why can't my uniform be as cool as theirs?"
I remember like at the bit at the beginning of the game where you dress in that dress uniform as Squire. I was like, I want to keep this on. It's amazing.
Well, cheer up, because if they ever remake Final Fantasy VIII, there'll be downloadable costumes, and that'll be one of them.
That's what we need to do. That's what we need need to keep making videos about Final Fantasy VIII, and then Square will realise that we love the game. That's part of it as well. It's that journalistic thing of actually people are talking about this game in a positive light. They really do want us to do something about it.
Nomura, come out. We just want to talk. Promise. We don't have sticks.
I promise you, we won't fight you. We just want to have a strong talk. That's okay. While we're here, what's the deal with Kairi? Can you actually give her a game where she does something and not relive other people's adventures? Thanks.
There are a few people that are misserved, definitely, by these games. It's a shame, isn't it, really?
Actually, speaking of the Seed uniforms, not sure if you guys have noticed, but if you look at the cuffs of that uniform, they have the little symbol of the school. So Selphie's uniform has the trabia symbol stitched into the cuffs of her uniform.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And you don't notice
Didn't know that.
the character models and like the original sketches of it, which I've been doing a lot. So that's why I saw it, and like you would never spot that until like there's so much detail in them. Like there's such cool costumes, like you were saying. They're like
actually speaking of costume detail, again, it was your costume video. At one point, you note that Adia's headpiece has like lots of shells on it, and then a clock underneath the shell. I'd never noticed that clock before, ever. And I've looked at these concept art drawings for like years of my life. So, again, you've blown my mind in so many different ways. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Yeah, no, because I love that first scene where she's introduced and she has like the red visor on it slowly fades away.
I wish we saw more of that,
Honest
actually.
to God, it is such a cool piece of the design, and I'm raging they did not keep it because I think it adds to it. I feel like it should have been in at the beginning of every like fight you have with Adia, and then I back up.
Oh, don't tease me like that.
like taking a Power Rangers mask off, that kind of thing.
Yeah, but I love the Power Rangers masks. I think every villain should have them. Every hero should have them. So
it turns out that the real villain wasn't Ultimecia. It was actually Rita Repulsa.
Yeah, the whole time.
My God, after 10,000 years, I'm free. So, okay, then we'll have a quick break and talk a bit more about Final Fantasy VIII in more detail when we get back. See you in a minute. Welcome back to the podcast. We're still here with May and Mol as usual, and we're going to be talking a little bit more in detail about Final Fantasy VIII. We've been doing that the whole episode, but this kind of like hones us in a little bit, and actually to go completely against that, the first question I'm going to ask you, May, and we have touched upon this, is what your history with the series is. I know you said about Kingdom Hearts, but it'd be good to get a bit of a grasp of when you played them and when you got into Final Fantasy VIII and other games in the series.
Yeah, so I had originally started playing Kingdom Hearts. I got into Kingdom Hearts with Kingdom Hearts 2. My cousin, I was at his house one day and we were having a sleepover, and he pulls out his PS2 and starts playing Kingdom Hearts 2. And I remember specifically that he was on, it was the Old Timey River. I remember being like, is that Goofy? What the fuck? What's going on? And I vividly remember, because we have talked about it since, it's still burned in my mind. I remember him turning around with a very pained look on his face and going, please do not ask me to explain this to you. I don't know how. I remember being like, God, you're such an asshole. But do you not think that I would understand what it is? And I just remember him going, please don't ask me. I don't know how to explain this to you. And I sat there all night on Wikipedia looking up what a Heartless and nobody was. And through that, like I played Kingdom Hearts 2 then, and then I went back and played Kingdom Hearts 1 and was quite disappointed because Roxas wasn't there, and he was my favorite character of all time. But I kind of knew, like anybody kind of does, if you play video games, Final Fantasy VII is just kind of in that cultural zeitgeist. You don't have to play the game to know there is that Cloud. Cloud has spiky blonde hair, Aerith dies, and Sephiroth has one big wing. So I kind of knew who they were, but I never realized that Leon, aka Squall, was also a Final Fantasy character until I saw it somewhere online. And I remember thinking, oh my God, like he's Final Fantasy as well. So wait, they're all Final Fantasy? Because I hadn't realized so many of them were, because I kind of had no exposure to the series. Like nobody that I knew, and nobody in my family either, had played Final Fantasy. And so I kind of went and I looked and I watched these. It's a channel that's long dead now, but it used to be called Game Trailers, where they used to make these really fantastic overview videos or retrospective videos about game series. And I was watching their one on Final Fantasy, and it came to Final Fantasy VIII, and it was like, oh, magic time travel, kids in orphanage, and also that's Leon. Leon's there. And I remember thinking, oh, I have to play that game. I have to see what the hell this is about. I have to, because I hadn't realized that the Leon character had a kind of female main character in the game. Like, I had no idea. I'd never heard of her. And I was so intrigued that, like, I had seen all these other characters and I could place where they were in these games, but I'd never heard of Rinoa. There's no mention of her. And so I played Final Fantasy VIII, and I vividly remember booting up the game, watching the intro cutscene and going like, what the hell is going on? But the thing I remember most is I remember the first time you're allowed to wander freely around Balam Garden. And I remember seeing the colors. I remember seeing the costumes. I remember hearing the beautiful Balam Garden theme. And I remember thinking, oh, I'm going to remember this moment for the rest of my life. I'm so invested in this immediately. Then I never stopped. That was how I got into the rest of Final Fantasy. I had finished Final Fantasy VIII and was like, well, I'm going to play this again, but after I'm finished playing it a second time, like, I want to check out all these other games. And that was kind of my introduction to it. Yeah, I just remember that moment so clearly, going around Balam Garden and being like, oh my God, this is so cool. I love this so much.
I played it when it first came out, but I had a similar experience with Balam Garden. Because like obviously everyone has, when they're growing up, they have that kind of like boarding school fantasy novel or something, and I think that Final Fantasy VIII with Balam Garden was my one. I think it was. I think I'd give anything to see that game in like 4K or some kind of real world VR. That's all we need, Square. We don't need a remake. We just need a VR game of going through Balam Garden. That's what we need, and have Laguna as our tour guide. That's all we want. That's just that.
So we're at the beginning where like Squall's like, yeah, the cafeteria is there, and that's where the dormitory is, and that's where we keep our cars. And do you need anything else? And Selfie's like, yeah, no, I want the full thing. And you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, sorry. Okay, here's the bedroom, I guess, and here's where we fight the dinosaur that they let wander loose in here for some reason. Yeah.
Yeah, by the way, can we talk about that? Why the fuck have they got dinosaurs wandering around garden?
Because Jurassic Park was the biggest film of the time, probably. That's what they've got to have a dinosaur in this game.
Okay, but Galbadia doesn't have dinos walking around. Trabian might have.
No,
but...
Galbadia has like dead hockey player students that like.
Oh shit!
You know
Yeah,
what I
that's
mean?
right.
Like,
that's true.
At least the dinosaur is in the training area where they tell you that you can't go after dark. The hockey ghost people thing are just kind of there all the time. Like, you have to fight them every time you're trying to cross the ice.
Why are you late to class? Well, the hockey people got in the way again. Oh yeah, excused.
It's necessarily to avoid the hockey people. That's, come on.
One of those weird things, isn't it? Like that sort of secret area at the back of the training centre, like where people go off and just have a quick, let's call it what it is, a quick shag at the back of the back wherever it is. Clearly, it's one of those things that's a bit of danger for people. We've got to get past a bunch of dinosaurs to get here. It's clearly a bit of a
just dinosaurs of all fucking things.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what. You might judge me now, because I realised this when I was playing through Final Fantasy VI recently, and then in that game, in order to grind out the last levels if you need for abilities, the best monsters you fight in the world of Ruin are dinosaurs in the forest.
Yeah.
And I realised that the weakness of the dinosaurs is ice, and I realised why. It's because it's the Ice Age. I didn't realise that until I did that. God. Yeah, I know. And it's the same in 8. Obviously, like your elemental attack is ice, and it's better. Yeah, I just went, oh my god, yeah.
Oh my god, yeah.
Oh.
So, yeah. I don't know what Meteor does to it. I know you put it to sleep.
That feels like a hate crime.
Yeah, like attacking that massive dinosaur.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there's only one dinosaur there. Like, he's clearly the last one they have. I feel like using Meteor would nearly be like doing the genocide run on Undertale. Like, it's just you don't need to do that. You have to have something going on in your life if you're doing that.
Yeah, maybe. I think as well, it's interesting how when Quistis takes you to the training centre, which is clearly trying to make her moves on you, and you're not making moves on Squall, and Squall's not having any of it. It's really funny how she just turns around and puts into conversation. Oh yeah, by the way, Squall, have you fought that massive T-Rex? It's just a completely nonchalant thing. Oh no, and he's like, I'm not sure. It's like, you're not sure.
No. No, I always find that scene so funny when, and it's really interesting because I only noticed this kind of replaying the game later for making videos, but that scene where she takes him to that little secluded spot, and then she's like, oh, I'm not your teacher anymore because I was fired from my job, and he's like, okay, sorry, what do you want me to do about it? And she makes a comment like, oh, it's like talking to a wall, but actually ages later in the game, when Rinoa is in the infirmary and she's non-responsive, Squall says the same thing to Rinoa. He says, oh my God, it's like talking to a wall. And then when Squall eventually begins to open up, when he takes Rinoa on that big long walk across the Horizon Bridge, he's only able to talk to her when he is sitting with his back to a wall and she's the other side of the wall.
That's a really good point, actually.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I've never noticed that. That's amazing.
He's only able to talk to her with his back facing her back against the wall, and he's the other side of the wall.
Yeah, what a scene as well. That scene where he's talking to her, and he's basically, like, the first time in the game, he's actually speaking his thoughts out loud. Oh,
going back to something that we said earlier, actually, I feel like that really fits his anxious character so much more than his blasé character too. Because I mean, I was diagnosed with extreme anxiety years ago, and it's gotten a lot better since. But sometimes it is really difficult to talk to people, and having that buffer of, you know, whether it be a screen or you're just sat next to them and not opposite them, you don't actually have to look at them, that really does help. So, you know, for Squall growing up as an abandoned child, essentially, not really sure on how to interact with his own feelings, and finally being given this chance to, the fact that it's to someone that isn't going to hear anything that he's saying is really quite significant for his character, actually.
And I think it's so true, like what you're saying. It's so significant for his character that the first and only time he ever vocally expresses something, and the only time he feels comfortable doing that, is when he knows, like you were saying, that she won't hear him. He's not listening.
Because Squall does open up more after that, but never to that degree again, either. Even though he does very much change as a character throughout the story. Yeah,
because they have, after that, I think the next time that they speak is they're on the Ragnarok then.
And he's closing up at that point again, isn't he?
Yeah, and, you know, even when she's like, you know, nobody ever hug you as a child? And he's like, oh, I'm just not used to it. I don't remember my parents. He's still opening up, like you were saying, but it's never to the same degree. It's awkward. It's kind of stunted. He's not really sure what to do, and he feels awkward about it. I think that's such a credit to what you were saying, that, like, he is more awkward than he is ambivalent. He is just, he has no concept of how to talk to somebody who's there about what he feels. He has no idea how to do it, and he's only able to really receive comfort or engage in comfort, or that kind of, like, I don't want to say intimacy because it implies something else, but it is like he's only able to engage in that for someone else's benefit. Like, Rinoa hooks him and he's like, I don't know what to do. But then when Rinoa's like, I'm scared, I'm afraid I'm going to go home, they're going to hurt me because I'm a sorceress now, and it's then that he's able to actually hug her for her benefit, but he can't receive it when it's for his benefit.
Which I think is such a realistic thing as well. Like, you know, obviously it's in the name. Final Fantasy VIII is a fantastical story, but in my opinion, definitely one of the most grounded ones. And I think the characters are the easiest to relate to. I know in one of our videos, Jack, you actually say it would be so easy to look at any of the cast and see a part of yourself in those characters. And I think, they all have their flaws. They all have their, you know, shining character strengths as well. But for the most part, they're all very real people. And I can imagine myself talking to any one of them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've mentioned quite a few times about how this game's sort of been misperceived, and that's not a word I just made up. It's been perceived differently over time and stuff like that, and how people may have received it less favourably than some of the other titles. But I think a lot of that might be because I certainly, my experience with Final Fantasy VIII, when I first played it as a kid and as a teenager, I thought it was the best thing ever. And then when I was sort of like getting to the early 20s stage, I sort of like shunned it a little bit because it was so raw and emotional. Whereas now I'm a bit older, I can look back on that now and think, actually, this is really realistic. Talked about the love story stuff. I think we mentioned this in one of our episodes, Mol, about, we compared Final Fantasy IX to Final Fantasy VIII, and in Final Fantasy IX, the love theme in that is very, like, romantic, and it's kind of like how, you know, it's that kind of like classical boy meets girl, they're star-crossed, you know, and then they get together at the end. Isn't it fantastic? Whereas VIII's more like realistic, and it is awkward, but that's what it's like, especially when you've got your first experience of this kind of thing. So I think that's probably made people, maybe not put people off, but it's kind of made people like go back to it a little bit less at a certain time in their life because of that, because of the fact it is so realistic, for want of a better term. Even though there's dinosaurs and spaceships that appear out of nowhere, that sort of stuff, you know, it still feels really realistic and grounded with the characters anyway. So.
Tying it back to one of your videos, actually, May, you spoke about how, you know, it's really quite a misnomer to talk about how Squall and Rinoa are just continuing the romance that Julia and Laguna were meant to have. I was really, really struck by that video on how you really emphasised that it's not destiny, it's not fate, and, you know, this is despite being in a game where destiny and fate are kind of really central to the theme. I mean, you also made the great point about how Squall, no matter how much he tries to struggle and how much Garden fucks him over, he's still destined to become this seed that defeats the sorceress. Rinoa is destined to become the sorceress by virtue of the closed time loop. But the fact that they aren't star-crossed lovers at all, it didn't actually have to go down this way at all, is something that I find quite refreshing. And I mean, it's very easy to write it off as, well, it's a Final Fantasy game, this is the heroine and this is the hero, they're going to get together, and it you know it's going to happen. That's just how these games go. To be fair, 8's kind of the one that started the whole, there's usually a love interest. It's very, very much not on the table beforehand. If you ignore Final Fantasy IV, that's its whole separate thing.
Yeah.
But knowing that at any given point, they're not just recreating the same story that their parents did, and that they were able to do something I mean, at the beginning, they fucking hate each other. I loved that. Yeah. I really loved that.
It's like a realistic, it's not, because sometimes I find that those like enemies to lovers things are incredibly contrived, where it's like, if you just talk like normal people to each other, you wouldn't be enemies. This is so fake. Or it's like, they're enemies to lovers because one of them is just like incredibly abusive and the other person is just, you know what I mean? Like, so I find it's often a strange balance, and it can be hard to get right. But I feel like Squall and Rinoa hate each other for reasons that I could totally empathize with. Two 17-year-olds hating each other. I can see why they both don't like the other, but it's also not such a vitriol that it can't be overcome. And you're not like, I don't want these two together. They clearly hate each other. Why are we even,
Yeah. Something that I remember hearing about Final Fantasy VIII, which, and this was years and years and years ago, but it stuck with me for the entire duration of like my enjoyment of this game, is that the characters change, and they change each other for the better, and they don't realize it. I mean, if you contrast the way that Squall and Rinoa actually act at the beginning of the game to how they act at the end of the game, they are completely different. I mean, Squall opens up, kind of, he mellows out, kind of, and he becomes more confident in his position in the world. Meanwhile, Rinoa goes from this really upbeat, bubbly, like, not necessarily my way or the highway, but she definitely thinks that she's in the right. She's the one that's leading the Timber Owls, and she's very gung-ho, to being a lot more reticent and a lot more uncertain. It's almost like they've given each other's personalities in a way, which I've always really loved, because there's no getting away from the fact that the people you meet in life do change you. And that's a wonderful thing. We should celebrate that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that was always, again, another huge pet peeve. And one of the reasons I started making these videos is because I was like, I feel like I'm the only person with this opinion. What the hell are you guys seeing that I'm not seeing? And that was one of them, where it was such a pet peeve. Like, anytime there was a video of Squall and Rinoa, or even just something about Laguna, it would be like, oh, I'm so glad that they were able to fulfill Laguna's destiny. And it's like, no, it was not his destiny. Jesus Christ. Like,
Laguna's destiny was to fall off a cliff and accidentally become president.
Laguna's destiny was to, at any possible moment, pick the wrong thing to do, just because it was one thing to do. Like, that was Laguna's destiny. But it was so strange to me that was the reading that a lot of people got, because my reading of it was that they were, like I said in the video, that they were, even unconsciously, not being like their parents. They were the generation that wasn't going to do things that the previous generation had done, and they were learning, like Squall learns to, I suppose, individuate himself more, and a lot of the characters learn to individuate themselves more. Like, even with Cypher and stuff, Cypher doesn't want to kind of go along with the Gardens thing. I think that's kind of a more complicated thing than maybe a lot of people want to put down in. I think a lot of people either see him as open and closed. He is the great sort of victim of the story, but I think it's definitely a lot more complicated than that, because he's quite a violent bully. Like, he's very threatening to a lot of the characters. He says to Quistis, when she kind of gets a little dig in at him, they're the head of the disciplinary committee, and he tells Raijin and Fujin, just put her on the list and we'll deal with her. Like, I think he's a character that I think has the same sort of, I know I'm going on a wild tangent here, but Cypher as a character, I think, gets the same sort of treatment as the Draco Malfoy, where he's like, he's the sort of he's the blue-eyed, bleach blonde-haired, sort of borderline white supremacist of the story, and then everyone's like, oh, like, baby, like, oh, I love you, sweet prince, like, they didn't give you a fair shot at all. And I'm like, he's certainly a very interesting character with a very, I think, compelling arc. arc. I don't know would I go as far as to say that, like, you know,
I think there's definitely an argument to be made that in the grand scheme of things, and this is something that I would be very surprised if they didn't have in mind when they created the story, considering it is about child soldiers and being brought up in an orphanage, but like he's a product of a failed system. And he has been continually rejected by that system, and this is, you know, what happens when you are continually rejected. You become an angry individual. It very often doesn't lead to particularly positive outcomes. I know there are people out there who are able to break that cycle, but many more of them don't. You know, I don't necessarily think that was what they're trying to say with Cypher. I don't necessarily think that was their be-all, end-all, but it would be foolish to ignore that, I think.
Yeah, he's like the proto-incel, isn't he?
Sort of.
Proto-incel.
We did date Rinoa for a while.
I don't want to sort of like, you know, I'm not too familiar with what that term means. I've never dived into it really, but it's kind of like that, like, disenfranchised young man that is influenced by someone else that drags him into this, I'm going to fulfill your dreams, it's really easy, come with me, kind of thing, you know. Again, he's like, I'm making a link to the Lion, Witch and the Wardrobe that I did with Final Fantasy II. She's like the White Witch, and he's like Edmund, he's my Turkish delight kind of thing, you know?
Yeah, I think actually that's such a good point that, like, he does kind of become emblematic for that, like, disenfranchised young man who kind of goes down like a red pill rabbit hole because he's told that all the problems in his life can be blamed easily on this one person or this one group of people, and like we'll solve all of the problems you have or all the childhood trauma you have, but you just have to go violently attack these people and you'll feel so much better. And I think that's such an interesting observation, because that is kind of exactly what he then goes on and does. And I think even in Cypher's interactions with Rinoa, which I'm always weirded out that people view as romantic, and I understand that off screen they have a romantic relationship, and I totally understand that, but the only interactions with the two of them that we see on screen with the two of them together is Cypher making fun of her, saying, oh, you know, remember what are you doing fighting me, you know, remember when we were together? And she's like, stop, like, don't say that. And then when he has kidnapped Rinoa to sacrifice her to Adele, and there's a moment it seems like Rinoa might get through to him, where she's like, Cypher, you don't have to do this. This is really going to hurt me. And then Squall comes in, and Cypher's desire to get one over on Squall and show off his greater power to Squall completely eradicates any sympathy he might have with her. And then he's more than willing to sacrifice her then. His mind totally changes because his goal is just to punish. He's totally willing to sacrifice maybe the one person who might have gotten through to him from knowing him before all this, but in the end she is completely disposable. So I think that's kind of where his character goes as well, and I think that's kind of part of why he has, I think, very compelling character arc, because I think that is quite realistic as well.
Yeah, I think the fact that for me Cypher doesn't get redemption in game. You see him still alive in the game's credits, sure, but you don't actually see him getting that redemption, or even knowing if he is then accepted by the world or if he's pushed out and living on the fringes at that point. I feel like that's really significant, actually.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's not clear in that ending cutscene whether or not he has changed, because he's still tantrum when he doesn't get his way.
Yeah.
His, you know, the two lackeys, you know, right in the future, they're still on edge around him when he is getting angry. And then the big garden passes overhead and you see him kind of smile a bit, and you're like, what is his story in the end? Because it seems like he hasn't changed, and yet he seems at peace with the fact that Garden is flying above him and he's not there.
I feel like if 8 did get remake treatment, Cypher's story would be a good place to pick up the supplementary material.
I agree.
I'd be really interested in reading that.
Yeah.
I think it would be, it'd be interesting. You know, there's like that kind of like disenfranchised young man. What happens next? He's been brought back to the sort of, I don't want to say center ground, but he's been brought back to sort of reality and not behaving that way anymore. And it's like, where does he go from here? You know, almost like what they're kind of saying in the way is you can write your own story and you're now in charge of your own destiny. But they leave it a bit open. I think one of the things with that, I mean, one of the moments I love in Final Fantasy VIII is the bit where Fujin speaks to at the end of at the beginning of disc 4, the end of disc 3, where Fusion speaks finally speaks to Sifa. No, in the Blue Tip Pandora, where Fusion starts speaking to him normally, Sifa normally, and it's like done without the shouting that she's normally done. And I know there's something to do with like she speaks fully in kanji in Japan, but they've gone for a whole. She just says rage, and she's always angry, and then actually speaks to him normally at the end. I think what they're probably going for there is that doesn't get through to him in the moment, but like eventually does, and that would be an interesting thread to pick up on because they're great characters, those two. I love those two.
Yeah, I know. I think they're brilliant. Like I remember the boss battle you fight them in when they're in Balam.
In Balam, yeah.
Stuck on that so many times. So there was like a large portion of my life where I was like, I fucking hate these two. Oh my god.
Yeah, that's the first part I got stuck at as well. Other than fighting Diablos or Diablos or whoever's going to correct me on how to pronounce it, but like I remember getting stuck on that so much, and it's frustrating, that part as well, because without save states you've got to do the whole bit again. You've got you got to do that really weird pattern where you get the dog to run and get the fish, and it's just so frustrating.
Fuck that dog. I want to go on record and say fuck that dog.
Honestly, it's just the weirdest anomaly in that game. I genuinely think it's a bug that's just put in to kind of clear at that point. Like if you have the medal to continue on, it's so annoying.
Which is a shame because I really enjoy that general sequence. I love the idea of, well, the town that you started right next to is under siege. This is kind of your first time of really needing to be there. Like, it's pretty much optional up until that point. You know, Zell's family is there. He makes sure that he's there because he wants to see his parents. It's a whole thing. It's a really, really great sequence, and it's fucking ruined by that fucking dog.
It's good, like, because you have that connection to Balam. First of all, for yourself, because it's the first town that you go through. It's such a lovely, peaceful place. It's the one place you can go in the game where, you know, you're not fighting random enemies, you're not fighting random bosses. And also you have that connection with Zell, where it's like Zell is in your party, his family live there. This is your friend's family. Like, you've met this woman, you've been in this woman's house, so you're really connected to making sure this place is okay in the end.
Yeah, we're here to liberate Balam, you know. Like, that's it, isn't it? I mean, as I've gotten older and now I know how to do that part of the game, I enjoy it a lot more. But I remember a lot getting really struggling with those two. Well, I could always beat raging outside, but then when I went inside, it's just Fusion kicked my ass.
It wouldn't be a Final Fantasy game that you loved without a bit that you fucking hate about it.
That's a good jump in point, actually. Are there any other parts of the game you have that experience with, or as we're talking about Final Fantasy, is there anything that you don't like about it, or is there anything that other than the bit we just talked about that frustrates you?
Oh gosh, something that frustrates me, I think, was like well, this is really every Final Fantasy game. I don't think Final Fantasy VIII is the worst, but I think the random encounters up until you get that ability that oh god, I hate it so much.
I despise grinding, so 8 not needing to level, well, actually actively not leveling is the better way of playing the game, or the easier way. That was a godsend for me when I figured out that was the case. I'm with you. I'm completely with you.
Totally. And I'm somebody who I love video games. I love playing video games. I will never ever tell anybody that I'm good at them. If there's an easy way to play the game, I'm playing that easy way. I don't care. I'm sorry. I don't think if I wanted to play a game where I had to suffer the whole way through, I would play Pathologic. I'm not playing that with the ordinary run-of-the-mill video games. I'm doing easy mode. I'm doing the easiest way. When people were kind of giving out about that like leveling thing in 8, I'm like, I won't say shit about that. I'm very happy with that. I'm not complaining. What's the other thing that I kind of the Adele boss battle, because I didn't have Cactuar until about the third time I played that game, and that's like a really effective way of ending that boss battle very quickly. But before that, I found that boss battle extremely difficult. I died so many times. I died more on that than I did with Ultimecia. I found that.
Oh really?
Yes, yeah. What a nightmare.
You mentioned the White Seed chip in one of your videos.
God, I absolutely cracked up watching that. That was one of those things of like, there's real pain here. I feel it.
The amount of comments I got from people being like, I fucking feel you on that one. That Seed chip is the worst thing that ever happened to me. So many comments being like, yeah, I totally understand. And then I got one comment being like, I don't know what you guys are talking about. I always find it every time really easy. I think maybe it's a skill issue. I was like, yeah.
Wow. Maybe it's a skill issue to find it by luck. Now, I know that there's a video, there's a YouTuber called Alleyway Jack.
Yeah, I've seen that video.
Yeah, and he did a video recently on the White Seed chip, and it explains about, I think he's actually a game designer of some form, and he explains about, or makes the argument that when that game came out in the late 90s, it was around the same time they were trying to sell guidebooks, because it was kind of before broadband was a thing and everyone used to go on GameFAQs or whatever, and certainly before now where that's another thing to talk about another day, but like, or nowadays where you've just go on YouTube and find out how to do it really quickly, you get stuck. Whereas like he was making the argument that potentially the game was designed around getting someone to buy the guidebook as well, because I when I played 8 the first time, I remember like I got stuck in the sewer and I had no idea how to get over those flipping spindle wheel motor things, and they call something else, but that's what I'm calling them, my spindle wheel motors. And I remember like having to buy a guide to get past that bit because I just got so stuck. Something that's definitely a big problem in that game. But then again, I don't think it's really something you can lump at the game specifically. I think it's just the era of game design. I think that they fixed that a bit in 9. We talked about that at length, about how the way that world's designed, it seems it pushes you down more of a path, and there's certainly, I think, less places I got stuck in that game.
Yeah, it's a good point that you brought up, because I'm remembering the search for the Temple of the Ancients and the Key of the Ancients in Final Fantasy VII as well, and both of those are hidden liberally around the map. It's definitely feels like a very mid to late 90s game design thing.
Yeah. And I think as well, that was the time where, like, I know it was kind of coming to the end of its reign, certainly, but like the point and click adventure games had such a huge influence on both the developers and the players of kind of the games at the time, where, you know, it was literally the most ridiculous combination of items you'd put together to get some sort of, or, you know, the most hidden thing possible. So that was kind of just an accepted part of kind of gaming as a whole. That was just, people were expecting that.
Definitely. I've got to ask you as well, because you sent in your email about Final Fantasy III's last boss, just to get you some, I guess, empathy with Mol. So do we mention about because you talked about 8 being your favourite, Final Fantasy games you don't like, or things about the series that you don't like? And again, we're all friends here, you're not going to upset anyone.
So I'd mentioned to you before, I would normally say that the game I like the least is Final Fantasy II, because oh my god, the backtracking in those dungeons, it's so exhausting. But I love that final boss world. I love the design of the Emperor. I love the heaven and hell thing. It's so beautiful. The backgrounds are gorgeous. I love it so much. I'm one of the rare defenders of that little word system where we like it as well. I think it's fun. I've seen so many people rag on it, and I think, like, of all the things you can criticize in Final Fantasy II, that's
not one of them.
Really not. So that kind of, even though I had a really frustrating time with Final Fantasy II, and like the random encounters are just so annoying.
Oh, yes.
Oh god, they're awful. They're some of the worst in the series as a whole. But for me, I did not enjoy Final Fantasy III as much. Like, I didn't even finish it. Like, it was so, for me, I suppose I like games where there's like more of a story. And while Final Fantasy III, I understand, like, mechanically is super interesting to play, the gameplay is super interesting, not knocking that. But for me, I was just kind of like, I wasn't as, I guess, connected to it. I didn't really care as much. And so I was kind of going through the motions a bit, and I found it tough to finish. And I was kind of hesitant to say this, because I know it's a game that has a lot of positive reviews among people. They feel about this game the way I feel about Final Fantasy VIII, but I am a Final Fantasy versus 13 truther. So
May, I'm holding up my hands to you right now. Please elope with me.
We're going to do it, Mom. Sorry, God. But I understand why it had to be done. I think the fact they got a game out in the time frame they did is a miracle. And I think even some calling it a miracle disparages the amount of work that went into it. It didn't magically happen. People worked their ass off to get a game that was functional out. I think that deserves incredible praise, because that was an exceptional thing that they managed to do. However, I think having to pay several rounds of DLC, when that base game came out, having to pay that several rounds of DLC to find out what happened before the Royal Edition came out, that to me was so ridiculous. I was like, I'm not engaging in that at all. That's so, I understand why, but I don't see why people had to foot the bill for additional storytelling that you couldn't include. that's not on the consumer necessarily. And I totally understand that it was an absolutely ridiculous development cycle, and I have huge sympathy for everybody who worked on that game. I hope they made millions off of it. But at the same time, I just couldn't. And I suppose my biggest beef with it was I couldn't reconcile having to pay extra money to see a female character with some sort of agency in that game.
Yeah.
You have to pay money. And I, you know,
this sounds familiar. We've had this conversation before, haven't we, Mol?
Like we're on the same page with this, but
yeah.
And like I think Final Fantasy 15 is a beautiful game. I think so much of the ordinary world that you travel around is beautiful. I can't reconcile, I suppose, as well, because like I said, Final Fantasy versus 13 Truther, and we don't know what those characters would have been like. We might know if Rex ever gets made, but we don't know. I just feel like it was disappointing to me that the team looked at what can we cut out of this to save
to then sell back.
Yeah, but also what can we cut out of this and our players will still enjoy the game. And like the first thing on the chopping block was like a fully rounded female character, and that to me, I suppose, soured. And then you have to pay money to get, you know, a female character who is treated like a person in any way, and who also lives at the end. You know what I mean?
We talked about in our 15 episode on the podcast, we talked about how I thought the best part of that game, because I've not played any of the DLC, but the best part of the game are the two chapters. I think it's chapter 6 and 7 where you have Iris and then Aranea in the car. And then, well, Aranea doesn't get in the car, but Aranea, like, so you have her as like and that's like, wow. And I remember playing it thinking, why do people not like this game? It's just so good. It's building so well. And then as soon as after that, it just takes a nosedive. Yeah. But you're absolutely right, because they're, and ironically, they are the best characters. We've talked about this. Iris is the best character in the game, I think, like personally. But fantastic. But yeah, we need that's it. We need an episode Iris and just remake the game around her. We talked about how we recast the game to have Iris and Aranea and Luna Freya on the road trip.
Please,
which would be way better.
You have beef with Nomura. I'll take down Tabata on the other side, and together we will reign supreme.
We'll get that done. You know, it's so funny because, like I said, like I mentioned before, like I started with Kingdom Hearts, and like I remember when the Kingdom Hearts 3 DLC came out, and you know, you lose, and then Sora gets put in crystal stasis, and then all of a sudden the famous I can't sing, so you're not going to know what that was. That was the Final Fantasy versus 13 theme. It comes in, and like they were. And everybody's like, oh my god, what's the connection? This is insane, what's happening? And then Square was like, oh yeah, no, it's just like whatever. That's got nothing to do with versus 13. It's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
So we'll see if that ends up happening. But yeah, that was kind of my petty beef with Final Fantasy 15. Again, I think it's a beautiful game, and I empathize with why people like it so much, because I think I see a lot of what I love 8 and why a lot of people like 15. That it's flawed.
Yeah.
Game, but with a lot of heart. I get that totally, and I understand that, and I totally empathize with that. But you know, if I wanted to see 4 young fellas riding around in a car, I'd just go to my local Tesco car park and give myself the money. But again, I don't have, you know, I don't have any serious beef with that game. That was a joke, because again, I do think beautiful game, and yeah.
Yeah, annoying as well. I mean, we've gone on about length of this, but it's annoying how most of the story beats, like, you have to understand the game, are told in that car, because there's so many different, like, bits of dialogue that they repeat that it just makes me want to mute it and just zone them out. And then they start saying, oh, actually, this thing's happening, this thing's happening. It's like you actually have to pay attention to it to make any sense of what the fuck is going on. So it's like, frustrating.
At least the only exposition on like vessels and FFA is just going to dollar, and that bit's very, very quick. So
yeah.
That's the best scene of the game, because it's got Zhu in it, though. I love Zhu, the warmongerer. We need to get paid more money.
Like if we'd stayed longer and just kind of let them ransack the town more, we would have got way more cash out of that.
I know. Yeah, good old warmongerer Zhu. We love her.
Yeah. So on the video I made about like the garden being a failure, there were loads of comments of people being like, no, Sid actually tells the seeds that he wants them all to be individuals, and like the garden staff are the ones that made them all kind of greedy warmongers. But like, Shu says that within earshot of Sid, and he's not appalled or horrified. He's totally aware that this is the product. And also, like, speaking of that Dole mission, Sid says he wants them to be individuals, that he doesn't want them to be robots, and he wants to foster individuality. And then,
now fuck off into the war machine.
In you go into the big colonizing army. If you look at his actions, it's the total opposite of what he claims to want. Like, he says, I want you to think for yourselves. I want you to be individuals. Cypher in that Dale mission thinks for himself and is very much an individual. And we can kind of glean from the dialogue around that he has done that every time he's done a seed test. And he fails. When Cypher thinks for himself, he fails the seed test. So clearly being an individual robot and being a seed are incompatible. And every time Squall says to Sid, I don't actually want to lead this massive operation. I don't want to do it. Not for me. Please keep me out of this. You know, he's thinking for himself. He's not doing what Sid wants him to do. And Sid's like, oh, you've no choice. You have to do what I want you to do. So anytime a character asserts any sort of individuality that clashes with Sid's plan, he goes, yoink, no, sorry, you're not doing that. You know, that was kind of the main criticism of that video, was that no, he says he wants them to be individuals, but he doesn't act like it.
Sid Crane is the real villain of Final Fantasy VIII.
He is definitely the real villain. It's interesting how, like, actually Seifer's right on the Dollet mission.
Yeah.
Like, he does the right thing. I mean, okay, to be fair, he does it for the wrong reasons. He's trying to prove himself, but he does the right thing. And then later on in the story, which is my favourite part of the game, gameplay-wise, when Squall and whoever you've brought back with him go back to the garden to warn them about missiles, and they're infighting with each other. They're having a political match between Sid and the Garden Master, and you come in as Squall and his party and say, look, we've got an existential threat here. We need to come together. And obviously Squall then, by his actions, does that. But he has to sort of go against the norm and do it. So he's almost like acting like Seifer and being an individual. So it's just like, it goes to that point before about how Seifer's done dirty in this game because the system fails him. Like, I think Mol said that earlier. It's a brilliant game. Then this is the thing as well. This, again, is part of the other thing, like you say, we big this game up and its themes, which I think is a lot of the reason your content specifically is resonating with people. I noticed that comment where someone says it's nice to have someone talking about this game without having the same parroting points everyone else makes. You know, that's something I think is really good to highlight, because Mol knows this. I hate when people parrot the same points. You know, I can understand someone agrees with someone, and I get it, but when they just go, I'm going to say this because I know people will watch it and like it, I think that's kind of what we're trying to push against, which I suspect you are as well. So.
It's natural, organic discussion that we're trying to promote, and obviously by having you on, we're very much trying to elevate your voice as well, because that's exactly the kind of content that we want to see more of in the world. And anyone listening out there that wants to get in on the discussion, please make your own content. We'd love to hear more of this.
Yeah, absolutely. This goes to show that, like, I was putting out those videos because I was like, I feel like I'm the only person who thinks this, but it makes so much sense. And then I put the videos out there thinking it was just me. And then
you find so many more people that agree.
There is always an audience, no matter what your opinion is. And even if it's an opinion that people don't agree with, at least it sparks a discussion. At least oh, well, we'll think about this, and well, actually no, it's this and this and this. You know, it's it gets people talking about something, and especially for a game like Final Fantasy VIII, where a lot of the talk around it had died a long time ago. It's, you know, no matter how dead you think the niche or the game you want to talk about is, you never know. There are people out there who would maybe only be too delighted to have that so-called dead niche revived. Like, there is always an audience for your content, no matter how small you think it is. Always.
Yeah. Piggybacking off of that as well, to me, it also feeds into the whole content machine, which isn't what I'm trying to make. I don't think is what you're trying to make either. It's not stuff that's created and then churned out and then we move on to the next thing. You can still love stuff that's 20, 30, 40, 50 years old. You know, the conversation will be evergreen. There will always be people that are interested and want to discuss it. Just because it's not the main thing of the week doesn't mean that it's any less popular or any less important to talk about. Again, just like you were saying, you know, even if people disagree with you or your opinion is wrong, not that an opinion can be wrong, that's not something to be afraid of either. You know, there's no shame in being wrong. There is only shame in not learning from being wrong. And I think that's something that we could probably all stand to bear in mind. I know I'm very guilty of going, well, I didn't get it right the first time.
Yes.
I'm a failure and I need to retreat forever. But there's no shame in changing your mind. There's no shame in having an open discussion.
I'm the same, and I think as well, having voices for, I think you mentioned, May, at the beginning about how there isn't as much content in this vein with sort of a female voice. And I think a lot of the time, and I've seen this more now, having a shared sort of content channel. I don't see it directed at me as a man, but you see the differences in when both Mol and I put videos out. The comments are completely different, the vibe from them, which has really been interesting for me to sort of see that. So I think my part in it is to go, well, hang on a minute, let's sort of use that to our advantage a bit, to give people that have these important opinions to have, and give that platform, people that of that ilk. I don't know what the phrase would be, but you see that point. To me, my thing, recently a lot of stuff's happened in the industry. I don't know how sort of involved in the journalistic side of the industry you are, or whatever games media you've consumed, but recently Play Magazine closed. And there's been obviously the industry itself has taken a massive hit post-COVID, but probably in the worst way journalistically, because all these publications are closing, and most of the content that's out there now is that parroting part of the content machine, like Mol's just said there. And I think the only way to really resist that is to talk about some of this stuff in depth.
Yeah.
And I really think it's important to do. I mean, you could argue, oh yeah, we're just talking about video games, but actually using them as a vehicle to talk about real issues without being overt about a specific thing going on, I think is really important, and I will always stick up for that. So I think you're very good at it. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much. Yeah, no, and just to say on both of those points, like when I am researching stuff for videos, and I'm like you were mentioning there, like the video game journalism, when I look at stuff that has been created and written and thought about for Final Fantasy, and specifically Final Fantasy VIII, so much of it is written by women and femmes who don't kind of get the credit for that. Like, so many, when I was researching stuff, I was expecting it to be like, it's just a reality that Final Fantasy was always kind of aimed towards men, because they were the only people who were assumed to be playing video games, and so their developers were predominantly male and their audience was predominantly male. But like, when I meet people who like Final Fantasy, it is such an even split. And so when I come on YouTube, I often find that there is a lot of, not that they're making horrible videos and they're all completely wrong and they should be all boycotted, but there are a lot of the same voices, and it's a lot of male voices about it. But when I look at the behind the scenes of who's writing out all these essays, who's making all these articles, who's doing all these deep dives, a lot of them, so much of them, are not men, who are kind of buried under, or have their work used to further work by men in the industry, or men in video games or whatever. And I just want to shout out to them, because really a lot of work goes in that doesn't get credited. And like you guys were saying, there is a huge difference in how people speak to Mol and myself compared to how people would speak to you, Jack. And
yeah, definitely,
that's not a knock on you at all. You're making equally as good content, but there's a way that we're perceived.
Yes.
How when we say something, our authority is kind of questioned. And even I noticed that in my videos, where I've gotten a lot of comments being like, you actually don't know what you're talking about, this is stupid. Everybody gets comments being like, on the internet, going like, fuck off, I hate this video. That's a completely gender neutral experience. But everybody gets like, this video sucks, you're horrible, get off YouTube. The tone difference certainly is more.
Totally, absolutely. And I think for me, my take on it, and I've never really thought of it like this before, I think I never want to come across as like a white knight, because you guys can more than speak for yourself. I mean, just to caveat that, what you said about people voices behind the thing, Mol does the majority of the writing for the stuff we do. Yeah. I know I'll do the framework stuff, and I make it look pretty with the editing, but Mol's pretty much the brain, I think it's fair to say, behind this actor. So that's my way, is basically, if I platform as many of these voices, I'm not trying to take a quota and get female and femme voices on, but I found your stuff because it was interesting to listen to, and there's more, and the more of that, the better, I think so.
And I mean, if the straight white men that are the voices that are amplified, and you're using that power to amplify other less amplified voices, then that's the right way to do gender, in my opinion. So I mean, even just this, having our first guest on be someone that isn't the standard, you're already doing a great job, Jack. So thank you. Well, and the thing is, I didn't deliberately go, let's get a woman on first. It just happened to be that someone that was very good that I wanted to speak to was that was by accident, which I guess may speak
positive for me as well, I guess. But I think it's more, I mean, I found just to jump on your point as well, May, about the 50-50 split thing. I did a video this time last year where I did like a Final Fantasy VIII video. I wouldn't recommend you watch it because I'm really embarrassed by it now. But I had like people come on and do little segments about what the game means to them and stuff like that. I just asked the community, and I think I got 10 people on. I think it was like 6 men, 4 women. That was, so the point is, it was like that happened naturally, and that's more or less 50-50 split, because it's only 10 people. That could have been either way, you know what I mean? And it wasn't me planning, or let's make sure I tick a box. It just happened, and I think with that kind of thing, that's what I'm trying to cultivate anyway.
Yeah, again, discussion benefits everyone.
Yes,
absolutely.
Yeah, totally agree.
Cool. Right. So let's move from that deep and quite serious thing there to a little bit of a quiz. Now, I when I wrote these, some of these might be difficult, I think, but I suspect you'll know them. Because I think you've told us stuff we don't know, which
you've
says
obviously
to me
got the credentials, yeah.
Okay.
and some of these out of context might sound a bit funny, and I will admit I've done it deliberately to make it sound funny.
Bring it on, let's see.
Okay, so this is a Who Said What quiz, Final Fantasy VIII version. Simple. There are 5 questions, should be quite quick, and it's basically we're going to ask May who said this in the game. So the first one, and I'm going to say Sifa because that's how I pronounce it. Sifa, how many times has it been now?
I think that, that's either Quistis or Shu. Shoot. Oh gosh. It's definitely Quistis or Shu, I think. I could be totally wrong. Is it Shu?
Yes, it is. It is. That is on the scene we mentioned before, on the ship going towards Dolit. And I think he replies with, I just love these exams. Okay.
Second question. Don't go back on your word. Come on, go wave to her.
Oh God. Who would be saying that, and who would the her be? Is it Irvine? I feel like that's something he would say. No.
I'm afraid not. Do you want a second guess?
Oh God. Yeah, no, I have no idea. Yeah, you're gonna have to tell me.
This one is Kiros. He's talking to Laguna.
Oh yes, of course. Oh, at the beginning, yeah, they're in the bar and he's talking about Julia. Oh, yes.
you did know it, so yeah, that's fair enough. 3. A new era has just begun.
That is Dia in the scene where she's talking to the crowd about how she's going to kill them all. Yeah, that's
God, you're good at this.
I would have accepted Ultimecia there because she's speaking through a deer, but yeah, you're right, it is a deer. Yes.
All right, 4th one. You can't change the past. I just found that out.
That's Eleni. Or Eleni.
Correct.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite scenes in the whole game, and I think she's such a crucial character. That's another person I'd love to make a video on. But yeah, that's Eleni.
Do it. That's interesting how you called it Eleni as well, because I've always called it Alone.
Me too.
Alone. And then just before I made that second video about kind of the generations, I saw a video of somebody pronouncing it Eleni, and I went, oh God, I've been pronouncing it wrong the whole time.
I always thought it was Alone because she's alone.
Yeah, so did I.
That's just me. Yeah, that's just me being.
Okay, just had a very quick look at the Final Fantasy wiki, which isn't the be-all, end-all 100% of all knowledge, but they do have her name listed as Erone. So I guess we're in the middle somewhere of being right and wrong.
Ellen. There we go.
Ellen. All right, last one, Jack.
Last one. Whoa, I'm with you.
Oh, come on, put a bit of zing
into
fine.
It. Whoa, I'm with you.
Is that Zell at the beginning when you put him with Squall for the Dale mission?
It is indeed. So good at this.
They are very good at it. So you got 4 out of 5 there. Technically, I'd give you 4.5. Yeah. 4.5 because you knew it when you got 2. So that was cool. That's good. I enjoyed that.
I feel really great now that I got at least some of them right. Yeah, I was kind of worried about it. Oh my God, I'm not going to know any of them. The people are going to be like, she's a fraud.
I could have been like tricked you and been like, who said whatever? Oh no, it wasn't Squall. It was actually Quistis when she emulated him. No, I wasn't going to be like that sort of twat. So.
Well, yeah, it's been an absolute delight having you on, May. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for your content as well. I really, really hope to see more videos from you in the future, and to keep being able to chat with you as well, because this has been great. Yeah.
I'm sure at some point we'd love to have you back again to talk about something.
Absolutely, I'd be more than happy to. Thank you so much for inviting me on. I've had such a good time, and I wish the same to you guys with your channel and podcast. Best of success, you guys. Deserve it. It's so much fun to be on here. All right, so to close us out then, I guess it would be, where can we find you online, May? You can find me on YouTube. I'm at GameDove. My videos are under GameDove. I am considering starting like a Twitter or some other social media that people can find me on, but if I am, it will probably still be some variation of GameDove. Come on over, watch all my Final Fantasy videos, and make passive-aggressive comments about the way I pronounce things in the comment section if you want. I don't mind. All good.
For me, you can find me still just about on Twitter at Jack and Mol 8, but I'm also on BlueSky. I think I'm JackieBoy34 on BlueSky, and also on Threads. And also you can find us at EXP Required on both those platforms and YouTube as well.
And likewise, as usual, I will be at Adramalek on both Twitter, which I will be using only sparingly from now on, and on BlueSky.
Fantastic. Right. See you next time. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Cool.